Hello. I recently recorded a diary video where I talked about starting my brand new summer project, collecting a Space Marine army that I can use in 11th edition 40k and 2nd edition as well, and maybe 3rd edition if I'm feeling fancy. This is the second entry in that diary series, and today I'm going to be talking about the miniatures that I want to collect, the retro models that I am most excited about, and we're going to be taking a look at this book to start with, and then exploring some of the classic resources online that show off just the absolutely amazing Space Marine models of yesteryear. So my watchwords for this Marine project are suitability, price, availability, compatibility, and excitement, ability, space, because these are Space Marines. So I need to make sure that these are not just available to buy, but a reasonable price, or that I can get hold of some other way that is reasonable and makes a lot of sense, that they are compatible with each other and with the games I want to play, which is 11th, 2nd edition 40k, that I'm excited about them and I want them to be in my army and I just want to see them on the table. I want to paint them and I want to play with them. Those are the key things that I'm most focusing on as I take a look at some of this stuff, which means that probably I'm going to create an army that makes no sense whatsoever, but I'm absolutely fine with that. Right, so you may or may not remember these classic collector's guides that Games Workshop used to publish back in the early 2000s. There were a load for different ranges across 40k and Warhammer and stuff like Moor time as well. They were really fantastic. There was loads of inspirational stuff in here, and it's basically a catalogue as well. So you get to see some of the fancy heavy metal models, but also you get to see what the codes were so you could order them. I thought I would start with this. Now, this is probably later than the era of Space Marines that I'm most interested in, but I've already decided that I'm not too excited. It doesn't really get me I'm not feeling super buzzed about the latest iteration of Space Marine models, not because I think they're bad, they're just not for me. There's absolutely nothing wrong with those models. I think that they're fantastic, but they just aren't what I'm looking for in a Space Marine army. So that's why I'm jumping into this and then working backwards. I'm a big fan of these classic collector's guides. I think that they're just absolutely fantastic, a great way to show off lots of different miniatures in the range, but also kind of inspire. There's a lot of cool stuff in here. I mean, there's an amazing diorama, Last Stand by Brian Shaw, that opens things up. And then you've got a load of the different chapters of the Adeptus Astartes as they were at the time. So the first founding, but then also a load of the known successor chapters. A few folks have suggested that I maybe take a look at the Hawk Lords, which I do quite like the idea of. They're predominantly purple. They're a successor chapter of Ultramarines, which I'd also been considering. But I've kind of been persuaded by both myself and by some other folks with some cool suggestions that actually creating your own chapter is kind of the funnest part. So I'm going to be building my own. I don't know what they're going to be called. Someone suggested Sorcerians, which is quite fun. But I'm going to be building my own chapter. There was one suggestion from Mike Wicked, which I absolutely love, which kind of, the suggestion was to lean into my own work as a Warhammer historian and try and make that a part of my Space Marine chapter's lore. So they are some sort of archivist, or they're a chapter of historians of some kind. I really like that. I think that also ties into the reason for them being firstborn, the reason they've not crossed the Rubicon, because they are very much dedicated to the history and the old ways and the tradition of Space Marines, and that's why they wear older armor. You know, how you square that with they're all going to be in sort of firstborn Mark 7 armor. Martha has decided to get involved, as we might have expected. She might make filming this bit more complicated. We'll see how we go. But yeah, I don't know exactly what that lore will look like when it all comes together. There you go. But yeah, the idea would be that they're very much into the history, and they have come either back through time from the warp, or that they've just preserved things. They are the embodiment of their own history and what they wear, their armor and all that sort of stuff. I am conscious that I don't want to lean too far. I mean, I suppose that's quite good for a sort of, we know the Imperium and its political tendencies skew very far right. There's an interesting thing there around tradition and that kind of leaning into that. I was thinking whether or not I wanted to go too far down that road, and I don't necessarily want to. There's maybe a bit of interesting satire that can be drawn out there as well, perhaps, if I decide to go in that route. I don't know. I'm not too sure where I'll take that. I'm just very aware that is part of 40k history, that satirical edge, that political commentary, and it also can be a part of really interesting stories to tell now. So maybe I'll explore some of that. Martha, can I just get this from under you? Is that okay? Thank you. Thank you. Okay, let's see if we can get any more of the book scene. So there's more chapters here. I mean, yeah, you see the Hawk Lords there in their purple and yellow, looking very cool. I do like them. So, if all else fails and I can't put something proper together, or I'm not satisfied with what I do come up with, then Hawk Lords kind of feels like that could be a fix. So, into the Space Marine HQ choices. So, obviously, there's some classic guys here like Marneus Calgar. Some of the classic, I really like the Captain with Terminator honors. This sculpt, which I think is a Jez Goodwin sculpt, is amazing. I know the Roman sort of Centurion Captain is very iconic as well, but I am quite taken with the Captain with Terminator honors. He's very, very cool. I like the Dark Angels. I think that they've got some really cool stuff as well. But yeah, I'm sticking with a more vanilla version of Space Marines, I think, for me. That's also why Space Wolves probably are not going to be something I'm looking at, even though there are some very cool models and some very cool background for the Space Wolves. I'm just going to kind of keep it a bit closer to basic Ultramarine Space Marines. So yeah, no Ravenwing. So I think, in terms of the HQ choices, I've kind of been thinking about, I've got my Sergeant in Terminator armor from the actual Terminator squad. I think we've also got the Librarian. Don't necessarily need to take another choice. I might look at something like a Veteran Captain or a Captain as well. But other than that, I'm not expecting to get too much because I don't think I'm going to have the points for it either. So we don't need anything else in this HQ space. I don't have a Chaplain at the moment, I don't think. And I've not really considered whether or not to get one. I think I need to take another look. They're very cool models. So there are some great Chaplains out there. So it could be a potential that kind of fits the vibe. I don't know how many points they are. And I think I need to drill into actually like the strategic choice of a Chaplain and how they can actually help you in battle, whether or not it's a necessity and how much value you get from one. What else we got? Librarian, so we've already got that covered. We're going for the very classic Terminator Librarian. We don't need any of these other fancy boys. Obviously, there's Command Squads, Tech Marines. I feel like these are all going to be way above the points cost that we're going to have. See here, you've got some great Golden Demon winners, some really classic stuff. I love Dreadnoughts. I think Dreadnoughts are really very, very cool. I'll see you later, Martha. So, yeah, lots of options there. Now we've gone for super classic Terminators. Obviously, these ones right here. I think this is the original range. Certainly the original Terminator Captain and the Terminator Librarian. I think you can, they stand alongside these guys so well. I know the scale is kind of an issue and they're probably going to be quite small when compared to certainly modern Terminators, but even modern Marines, modern Imperial Guard, they're all going to be a bit small, which I think is just something I'm going to accept. There is a question I hadn't even considered, but of course the base size shift, which I think will probably be a little bit awkward because I want this army to be able to be used in classic 40k as well as 11th edition. I think I'm probably only going to get away with that if I have opponents who are sort of happy to accommodate it. I'm probably going to go for the original bases. Or potentially, I saw the Wib with his, from Snipe and Wib with his Lamenters. I think he used the larger modern bases for some of his, and it does look quite impressive. That's kind of an option. I maybe give them more stability as well. But at the moment, I'm kind of thinking classic bases. I guess we'll see. So that's the Terminator choice. Obviously, loads of amazing veteran sergeants. I think, lots of fists in the air, lots of swords in the air, which can look great. I've always been a big fan of Deathwing Terminators. I think the paint scheme, the heavy metal paint scheme, and the Space Wolf Guard, These paint schemes are so nice. And I know this is sort of a lot easier to do these days with like an airbrush, I believe. I remember at the time, this kind of gradient sort of look, it blew my mind back in the day. Obviously, you're seeing a lot of solid block colours, and that was quite prominent, I think, around this era, around earlier, second, third edition 40k. These Space Wolves, when they started coming out, and they had the really sort of gradiated, the highlighted, silver and grey, looks amazing. And you see the same with like Imperial Fists as well, with their colour scheme. Very, very nice. Now, Dreadnoughts. I love Dreadnoughts. I really want to get a Dreadnought. I'm hoping I have an excuse to make a history of Dreadnoughts. Been working on a little script about it, so I think that should be quite good fun. They are absolutely fantastic. They've had a really interesting journey through 40k history to becoming these sort of walking tombs that they are by this point in 40k. And that happened relatively quickly, but there's some really nice stuff around the earlier version of Dreadnoughts as well. Now, it's crossed my mind about whether or not to take a look at earlier Dreadnoughts, and we'll see some of those when we take a look in a minute on the classic, the Stuff of Legends website, which has just got an archive of amazing retro models. But I do like these Dreadnoughts. I think that these are really, really cool. They're formidable. They just look awesome. I know that later on, they added like knees so that they made more sense and that they can actually walk and move. But I am quite partial to an earlier Dreadnought that kind of looks a little bit, it maybe doesn't actually work sort of functionally, but looks amazing. So yeah, I would like to get one. These tend to be a little bit pricey now, so it might rule it out. I don't know. We'll have to see. I also have no idea what armament I would take on it. I guess it would be, partially if it was pre-built, whatever it already had, and if I were able to get hold of one. I don't know. I quite like Power Fist. I mean, I think the Power Fist and maybe the Assault Cannon, the classic Space Marine Dreadnought, is a potential. That's probably the most likely. What else have we got? Space Wolf Scouts. I think these are cool models, but I'm not going to be doing Space Wolves, so I'm not going to do any of those. I do love the Wolf Scout Sergeant, though, with the big hair. There's a few Space Wolves with big hair that I think are absolutely awesome. Right. Okay. Space Marine Tactical Squad. So these Tactical Marines, I think that these were really nice. This 5-model squad, a few options. I think there's some really cool stuff. The classic Space Marines, where you've got the lots of different, obviously you've got different marks of armor, and they're all kind of, there's a bit of dynamism to them. The sort of stances are all kind of like, they're all stood around. They work really, really nicely. So I'm kind of in this area. Mark 7 primarily is what I'm interested in. I don't mind having a couple of earlier marks. I love some of the earlier armor designs. I think the Crusade armor and the Heresy armor, obviously, Mark 6 and B-keys and stuff are all fantastic as well. But I think for my force, for this army, mostly Mark 7 is probably where I'm headed. But I love a lot of these, so I might try and get hold of a selection of just the metal Mark 7s, and then you would also need to get hold of the plastic sprues in order to get the arms and the guns and the backpacks. But these models I think are really nice. Any selection of these Mark 7s is probably going to be fine. There were a couple of boxed sets released. There's the Space Marine Strike Force, which I like a lot, which I would love to be able to get hold of and may have a lead on, so we'll see if anything happens with that. But yeah, I think just standard Mark 7 Tactical Marines are going to be the biggest portion of my force, is my kind of idea. Because these guys just look so good. Now, I do want to get Space Marine Scouts, and actually, I've been lucky enough to get hold of some Space Marine Scouts already. So I actually have this box of Space Marine Scouts right here. I really love this era of Space Marine Scout. I think that they're just absolutely fantastic. Jez Goodwin sculpts, they just really nailed it, I think. There are earlier versions of the Scout models which don't always work. There's a couple in metal that I think are fantastic as well, which I'm quite interested in. But some of the plastic versions of the early Scouts are a little bit iffy. don't quite nail it, I've actually got a video on the way that takes a look at the history of the Space Marine Scouts that goes right back to the very first Space Marine Scout model, what informed that, and then how it was evolved and changed into these Scouts, which kind of became the default for subsequent versions of Scouts, for a long time at least. But I really like these 97 Scouts, and one of the reasons I really like them is because of the actual Sniper Scouts. I think that both Sniper Scouts are truly amazing models. In particular, the crouching Scout Sniper, just so cool. That absolute sort of special forces feel, but also is just so dynamically sculpted. It works perfectly, does exactly what it's supposed to. So I'm definitely going to get hold of those. But I also really like the Heavy Bolter Scout as well, mostly because it reminds me of Heavy Bolter gangers in Necromunda, which I really like. And I love the idea of Space Marine Scouts because they are sort of a dynamic, fluid, less formal version of the Space Marines. Having that kind of skirmisher, sort of ganger vibe, I really like it. So I like having the different weaponry choices, the shotgun, the sniper. They've also got the bolt pistols, and then you've also got the heavy bolter. I really like all of that, the way all of that comes together. So yeah, Scouts, definitely going to be in. Look out for the video on the Scout history next week on the channel. There is a question mark for me over vehicles. Now, I would love to have a classic tank, and the Rhino, that feels like a very solid fit. I absolutely love the classic Rhino design. One of the things that I'm quite eager to try and get hold of in this project, because it's kind of an archival project as well, like the Space Marine Scouts, like the Terminator Squad, where possible, I'm trying to get hold of the original boxes as well, which is rarer and makes it more difficult. Probably a really silly thing to do. But I quite like that. I think it's a really nice way to build out this collection for this army, for them to have their original boxes. It also helps me with my research and with my history videos. So there's a lot of different factors at play here. So I'm tempted by the Rhino, and it's certainly a possibility. What I would say is that the real winner, like for me, the tank that I would love to get, that I think is going to be almost impossible to get, potentially, is the classic Land Raider. So the original Rogue Trader era Land Raider. I absolutely love it. I used to own one in the very, very dim and distant past. I briefly had a Space Marine force that had a Land Raider that I bought the entire thing as a complete force from someone and then ended up selling it on. So another one of those classic regrets. But it did its time. I played some games, I had some fun, and then it was gone. But that Land Raider model is so cool. It's one of the sort of quintessential Rogue Trader models for me. So if I can get hold of one, and it seems not impossible, but not likely either, if I can get hold of one, then brilliant. That's going to be a centerpiece, and I'll build the rest of the force around it. So keep your fingers crossed for me on that. Here are some amazing showcases. So Darren Latham's Space Wolves, which are just gorgeous. I mean, he did a lot of those amazing Space Wolf models for every metal. Christian Valentin's Black Templars, which are also really gorgeous. I mean, all of these armies just look so good. Landspeeders, I like a Landspeeder, but I'm not at the moment thinking I would get one. I prefer the earlier Landspeeder. I don't mind the sort of the boot print Landspeeder that came later on. I kind of prefer the early one, not the super early one. So this is one where I would go second edition, but rather than first edition, because I think the early ones just kind of look like two guys barely clinging on to an engine. Looks like they're about to fly off. So I wouldn't be getting one of those. Not interested in bikes at all. Bikes are like cavalry to me, and I've always had an issue with cavalry. A lot of armies I've collected over the years, I've avoided cavalry. I don't know why. I think it's very, very effective in game, but it's just never been my favorite part of an army. So I don't really want to get bikes. Assault squads, I'm a little bit more interested in, but at the moment, I've got no plans to get any of those. Some really nice models, though, and I think I prefer stood on the ground, ready to leap. I think the occasional model that is in the air that has like a very elaborate tactical base in order to give it that height can look really nice. but that's kind of not. I just don't think I'm going to go for that. That's too much for me. So yeah, no bikes. Devastators, Longfangs. These guys are great. I really like the sort of later edition. I can't remember which edition they came out in. Maybe third edition Devastators with the big chunky backpacks. The real enormous backpacks full of ammo and coolant and whatever else is in there. I quite like those. So those Devastators, if I were to get Devastator Squad, it probably would be these guys over the classic ones. I think the classic ones are fun, but yeah, I think I prefer the sort of third edition ones for that. And then into the tanks, right? Yeah, Predators are fantastic. There's a lot of really cool different tanks. Classic Whirlwind, Vindicator. I'm not too taken with any of those. Obviously, as I say, Land Raider is what I would love to get hold of. I do like the Mark III Land Raiders. I think that is something I would potentially get if I were unable to get an original Rogue Trader Land Raider. So I certainly would consider it, I think. I'm not going to rule that out. Although a classic Predator could be pretty cool. And then we get into some dioramas, right? So you've got Horus and the Emperor. The absolutely, like, just the I'm trying to find the right term, but it's essential. It is so essential. It is the perfect diorama. It is 40K in a single image, essentially. So good. So fantastic. That Mike McVeigh diorama, just awesome. I've actually got an interview with Mike McVeigh coming up on the Jordan Sorcery Pods channel later this year. Very excited to share that. Just beautiful stuff. And then some Archive Space Marines. These are the good guys. This is the kind of stuff that I think is really, really fun. Going super old school. We'll jump into Stuff of Legends in a moment and we can take a look, but there are some really nice models here. I know some of these have been reissued later on. They've done sort of powered armor, Space Marine power armor through the ages. I think like the Mark I Thunder armor is really, really cool. They're just a very cool model. You get some really interesting poses with these guys. I think things like this Power Axe 2 guy, who sort of looks a bit more like he's getting involved, are really fun. You do get the odd pose where it's kind of a bit awkward. And some of these earlier Marines just look very, very lean. So you kind of don't get the weight that you get with some of the later, like, Tactical Marines, for example. But there are some fantastic guys here. Yeah, I mean, the original Lehman Russ and Marnius Calgar, fantastic stuff. Some of these guys I really like. I do like, there's a chainsword guy. There's another Space Marine, classic Space Marine with a chainsaw that I really like, who is kind of, again, dynamically like swinging or like going into the combat. That's great. Yeah, I like some of the early Bolter lads. This kind of has the feel of like LE2, the original limited edition first Space Marine. That kind of thing is quite cool. So there's a lot that I would consider. Oh, here he is. Yeah. He's kind of got his bolter pointed down, but that kind of thing. I know they've reissued that at some point, which again, I think in that case, the original is so expensive that a reissue would be absolutely fine if I decided to try and get hold of one for the army. Oh, and then, yeah, the old Grey Knights, which I think are really magnificent models. Absolutely love them. Don't think I've got an excuse to use them, so probably will not be getting any, but I do like those models a lot. So that is an absolutely fantastic book that just gives you loads of inspiration. They actually were able to sort of retain quite a lot of vintage stuff in there, even though this was coming out in 2002, 2003, 2002 for this one. I think this is one of the earlier ones. I've got a handful of these for other ranges because they are just so good. If you ever just want to just get into the nostalgia and the retro of it, these books are amazing. And I think that's why they're still quite sought after, to be fair. But now we're going to jump into the Stuff of Legends. Now, this is a website, an archive that's been created by a chap called Richard Orklord Hale, who has had it for decades at this point. He has got an absolutely incredible collection, and he has created this archive of his own collection, but then also catalogue pages and images, flyers, all sorts of adverts and stuff like that from across Citadel history. And it goes from the very early days of Citadel to, I think, it tends to get to about 2nd edition 40k before it stops. But that means that you've got all of that early Rogue Trader era, and even before that for Warhammer Fantasy. So you can take a look at like the Citadel C ranges, which are a really important range of amazing models, so much good stuff. And the website is just amazing. So we're going to jump on there and just take a quick look at some of those Rogue Trader era Space Marines as well. Okay, so as you can see, Stuff of Legends. I highly recommend this website. Go and check it out. I've put a link in the description down below because it's just so good. There's other things as well. Orglord himself, his collection is here, and it's magnificent. I'm not even kidding. There are so many rarities, all of it or most of it commission painted, just really gorgeous stuff. So if you want to just see what classic Citadel used to look like and some of those ranges, it is fantastic. But for us, we're going to jump in here to the actual Citadel range here. Yes, you can see all of these early listings for all of the like earlier pre-Warhammer ranges. Some really fantastic stuff in here. I'm a huge fan and a huge user of this website. I think it's just truly incredible. So very, very grateful that this exists. This is a resource that's so important. In my work as a Warhammer historian, I rely on stuff like this. It is one of the best resources online. So I cannot stress that enough, that this is absolutely incredible. But yeah, as you can see, the C series, which got loads of really cool stuff. But we're going to jump over to the Rogue Trader section, and we're interested in the pre-Rogue Trader Space Marines to start with. So let's take a look at those guys. Now, I don't think I'm going to get any of these, but I do really like these older models. I think that like the Heavy Laser Marine just looks really cool. There is the Marine Advancing, which I think is great as well. And this Marine here, I would happily have any of those in the army. Of course, you're going to have even another level of sort of scale creep from these guys. So by the time you're getting to the sort of 2nd edition Marines, they're already a little bit bigger, a little bit chunkier. So having these guys alongside, they're going to look a lot smaller. But they do look cool, and I'm not too fussed about that kind of thing. Some amazing models, some really cool stuff. I do quite like the idea of getting the ex-Brother Marine because it's the casualty, which I think the old casualty models were really, really fun. So yeah, there's some very, very cool stuff here. Some nice models. Definitely think about some of these guys. Really, really cool. So like here, there's just some great models to choose from. Tempting, very tempting to take a look at trying to get even just a couple of those early Space Marines. I can't imagine having a whole squad of them, which might give an uneven feel to a tactical squad that's got some of these guys in and then some of the other guys as well. But I do think that there's the potential there. Okay, but what about Dreadnoughts? They were absolutely awesome. These early Dreadnought armor, they're really, really fun. They were more battle suits back in the day, so they weren't the sort of the tomb that you would place a deceased or nearly deceased Marine in. They were much more just, a pilot gets in and pilots it into battle. So kind of like, they sort of cross that boundary into almost Crisis suit-like, I suppose, for the Tau. So I do quite like these. These are the sort of 3 original Imperial Dreadnoughts. I think they're quite cool. Would they fit in what I'm trying to do? Probably not. So, I think, although I do like them, it's probably not going to be the era of Dreadnought I go for. I think the later 2nd edition Dreadnoughts is probably where I would go. But there's a couple of other guys here that I think are worth looking at. If I did get a Rhino, I love the idea of getting the Rhino Marines. So these were Marines that are literally like on the outside of the Rhino, which is so cool. When you're using it as a transport, a way to represent that you've got your guys inside it is to literally have them hanging off the side, Gorka Morka style. Very, very fun. I really like it. I don't know how readily available these guys are. I think that they're probably very rare now. So. Okay, so looking at the old Scouts. Now, I quite like these Mark Copplestone ones. I think that there's some really cool stuff here. Especially this guy looks like he really means business. But yeah, I'm a fan of that era of Scout. This kind of like goes through into for a while, I think that this is a sort of generation. There's a certain feel to these guys, I think, that is, like I say, they're almost like gangers, and it kind of ties back to that early version of lore, which kind of, if you take the Ian Watson Space Marine novel, for example, you're recruiting new Space Marines from Hive worlds, from gangs. Yes, they can be coming from feral worlds and from lots of different planets as well, but the quintessential story for 40k at the time was that you're recruiting them from Hive worlds. These are gangers who then are trained and modified and brought into Space Marine life, essentially. I quite like that. I think that's very, very cool. I think it's a really neat story. So I quite like this type of Space Marine Scout. But, as I say, the Jez Goodwin later edition of the Scout, so like 97, it kind of goes up to that next step. Now, yes, they do become a bit more formalized. You lose some of that sort of rough edge, and they become a bit more like Special Forces, kind of SAS sort of troopers. And I think I like to think that there's a way to sort of bridge that gap, to have most of the Marines be the Goodwin style, and then maybe one or two of these earlier Metal Marines. There's a couple of other Metal Marines as well that I think are quite nice, the Scouts. So maybe we'll try and get hold of something like that. But yeah, I'm very conscious that this is all dream. This is like listing, I would love to have this. I'm very conscious this stuff can get really rare, it can get really expensive, so I'm not expecting that I'll be able to just get everything that I would love to get for this army. Here is that classic Rhino. These came in a box of 3 when they were first launched, which is wild stuff. I mean, I guess, it was the only way to produce them. The actual, the sprue was a mirrored sprue, so that you basically got the same 2 frames and you could flip them and then glue them together, and that's how they worked. Very, very cool. I think this is, it's a classic design, and it has stayed pretty consistent ever since. Yes, there have been detail upgrades, and they've made things better and sturdier and sort of bigger as well. I'd like to see how small these are on the tabletop at this stage. I imagine they're a lot smaller than you would expect. But yeah, the Rhino, it is tempting. It's tempting to take a look at one, but what I'm really sort of very excited about is trying to get hold of that Land Raider. So yeah, this version of the Land Raider, the original Mark I Land Raider, just so good. As I say, I've been working on a video about the Land Raiders. I've got a load of interesting stuff about that history, so I'm going to be sharing that relatively soon. I would love to have my hands on one of these guys, if possible. If you want to help me with this project, then I've got a load of stuff on eBay. I'm selling off like classic stuff from my collection and old stuff from my collection. I'm working my way through it, so just keep an eye on it. Joylin Sorcery is my username on eBay. I'm trying to add stuff to that and to raise funds for this collection. So if you're interested, you can check that out. I've put a link in the description down below to my user profile. I'm also obviously on Patreon, patreon.com/JoylinSorcery. That is not just to fund me collecting this army, which, would be awesome, but obviously this is my work. So I spend a lot of time researching the history of Warhammer and trying to explore that development and see how things came to be. So when I'm looking at the history of the Land Raider, I'm not just looking at the cool models, I'm also trying to take a look at how that actually evolved and why it was done in that way, and kind of piecing that together in the broader context of 40k and Warhammer Fantasy history and Games Workshop as a whole. To that end, I'm also looking to do some seminars later in the year. Hopefully, there'll be the opportunity for me to do that, just exploring the deeper history of Games Workshop and the sort of progression of the company and the games and the creative and commercial decisions that helped to build it into what it is today. So all of that work is stuff I'm very passionate about, and that is what you'll get access to, and that's what you're supporting at patreon.com/JoylinSorcery. There's exclusive interviews, I put articles on there, I share research and stuff like that as well, plus lots of other cool stuff. So if you're interested in supporting me in that way, you can do it there, and if you just want some cool stuff for your collection, then check out my eBay as well. So there we go. I've just been through a load of classic miniatures. I've flown through them, and apologies, I didn't really tease out specifics. I just wanted to bring up some of those pictures and share them because I think that they are really, really cool. But I know now that I'm going to be having a Terminator squad. I'm going to be having at least one tactical squad, mostly made of Mark 7 Marines. I want a Space Marine Scout squad with probably some snipers and some heavy bolter guys and a shotgun guy in there. I want, if I can get my hands on one, a Dreadnought, and especially if I can get my hands on one, a Land Raider. So I think that those are the sort of 5 key things I want for my army. I'm sure there'll be some other stuff and bits and bobs that come up and I think, okay, actually that would make more sense. I haven't taken a look at points costs. I haven't taken a look at if that's a viable army in either edition. I've no idea if it will actually play well or be able to take and hold objectives or anything. But that, it fulfills, of the space watchword, it is, the suitability. Sure, I think, these are, all of those are still legal and valid in both 11th and 2nd edition. In terms of price, that's an open question. We're going to have to see how these things shake out, whether or not I can get hold of them. Same goes for availability. I think a lot of these are going to be really tough to get hold of. So I'm going to have to sort of, maybe there's a bit of beg, borrow, and steal in there, try and get hold of some stuff, and have to compromise on things as well. So I'm not just going to get everything I want. It's going to be, what can I get? What's most appropriate that is actually available? And then compatibility amongst each other. I think that this is going to be an interesting one. I think some of these, I'm only going to know once I've got the miniatures next to one another. Are they going to look too disparate? Are they going to look like they're from just completely different ages? If I'm talking about getting 1 or 2 earlier Marines, are they going to fit in with some 2nd edition tactical Marines? If I want to get some earlier Rogue Trader Scouts, are they going to sit in 1997 Jez Goodwin Scout Squad and look really silly? I don't know. I think that there's definitely the potential for some models to work really well, and I think with a nice cohesive paint scheme, they can work really well and bridge that gap. And then the sort of broader question around that being, do they fit alongside one another? So I've got a Rogue Trader era Space Marine Terminator squad, and if I were to get hold of an old Land Raider, for instance, is that going to look really silly next to a 2nd edition Dreadnought? Potentially. I think again, a paint scheme will do a lot, and I think you can probably get away with it, especially with that lore where if they've come out of the warp, if they are walking sort of, they are their own reliquaries, and they are sort of keeping a lot of this history alive in and of themselves. That's why they've chosen to wear older armor. That's why they haven't upgraded and haven't sort of followed technology and developments and stuff. I think it could work, and it could explain it, and it could look good. So that's where I am. And then the last piece, excitability. Now, hopefully you can get a sense that I'm really excited by this project. And I'm really surprised that I'm that excited by this project. These are Space Marines we're talking about, which have never been my favourite army. They've never been my favourite part of 40k or Games Workshop as a whole. They've just always been there. There are some times when I thought they were cool and sometimes when I thought they weren't. But until recently, I wasn't that moved by them. But the more I've been looking into this, the more I've been thinking about this, the more I've been sort of dwelling on it and getting excited about it, it really has started to build for me. This as a project, it feels really fun. It feels like just a neat thing to do, and I'm having an absolute blast taking a look at some of the older models and thinking about how they might go together. I'm anticipating, without any significant dread, painting them, and it doesn't fill me with fear. I'm kind of looking forward to it in a way. I'm kind of like, okay, let's see what we can do. So yeah, this is a project already feels pretty good and feels pretty exciting. Still lots and lots to do. I've got a few prospective games in the diary. I've spoken to a few friends about potentially playing. So hopefully I'm able to turn things around in a quick enough time that I can have some of those games and they can be fun. But yeah, I'm feeling quite positive about this. This is going in the right direction and feels good. So there you go. That is the end of this installment in my Space Marine Diaries. This is a summer project. It's going to go throughout the rest of the summer. I'm not sure how many more parts there'll be. There'll definitely be a part about painting. There'll be a part about playing. There'll probably be a part about building out the army list and actually sort of formalizing that. Whether there'll be anything else, I don't know. And I also do know for sure, though, that Scouts is going to be the next history video. That's coming next week. We've got Land Raiders in the future, potentially Dreadnoughts, potentially some other stuff as well. So we'll see what that brings as the collection actually builds. But like I say, I'm excited about it. So until next time, thank you very much for joining me. I'm Jordan, and this is Jordan Sorcery.
you.